Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. Welcome to tonight's conversation on social emotional learning. I am Keziah Latour, the Director of Equity and Cultural Responsiveness. For tonight, this presentation is going to be from 6 to 7. That presentation portion may be shorter, but that 6 to 7 time is just allotted for the sharing of information about what we're doing at the district level. At the end of that conversation, we all have 30 minutes where we can engage in questions and answers. So that will still be a part of it. For tonight, I just want to explain the goals. So the first part is just to really explain what social emotional learning is in our district, its relevance to meaningful learning experiences. And then the second portion of tonight is really to give us an opportunity to engage, right? That's part of social emotional learning, that social engagement and social awareness. So again, welcome to our community conversation, social emotional learning. I want to take us to our agenda for this evening and provide you with a lens so that you can see what we're going to focus on. I will explain our norms that we have in practice, go over social emotional learning in terms of really checking to see where we are currently, going into the definition and some of the practices, and then the competencies. And then I'll highlight benefits, our goal statement as a district, and then some application at the elementary and secondary levels, going back to the importance of relationships, and then what we can do at home. At the end of the agenda, you'll see that I have highlighted questions for 30 minutes. So that is something that's paramount, and I love that portion of the presentation. I just want to say that if you have questions, please feel free to write those questions down. As soon as the presentation is concluded, we'll dive right into those questions. So we're going to start where we should, and that's with our norms. So I'm referencing Glen Singleton's Courageous Conversations and his 4 core norms. Again, staying engaged. This is a really important night for us. Experiencing discomfort as we learn or grow. Sometimes it's not comfortable, but it's a part of our growth. Speaking your truth is so valuable and builds agency. And expect and accept non-closure. There may be some questions posed this evening that at this time I'm not able to answer. However, I will seek an answer and make sure that I'm able to provide you with a response. So that would be the nature of our core values and pretty much our normings for this evening. These questions that come up will be easy for us to really engage in with the norms at the front and center of how we're going to engage with one another. So as part of our practice in Wissahickon School District, we established community norms, and the norms are so valuable because they really help us to understand with common expectations how we're going to engage with one another in a healthy and respectful manner. And so these norms that you see here are norms that I've selected for this presentation. Our staff may use a variety of norms and so forth in their meetings or in their classroom discussions and so forth. But the norms are really important because they establish those clear expectations of engagement. So since we're talking about social and emotional learning, connection before content makes sense. In the chat, please add which school or schools your children attend. So we want to kind of open up before we dive into the content of what social emotional learning is. The connection is also very healthy. As part of a practice that we have here at Wissahickon School District, we also dive into ensuring that we're intentional with those connections. So at the very start of a meeting or the start of a lesson, we want to make sure that it is a practice that we put in place to foster community, understanding, and a sense of belonging. So if you will, please take a moment to let me know which schools your children attend. And I can see we have someone here from the middle school, 7th grade, and the high school, 9th grade high school, excellent. Mom to a 10-year-old and high school teacher. Awesome, high school teacher. So again, just please make sure that you place in the chat, again, where your children attend or your child. Let's have that there. And thank you all for showing up tonight. 1st grade, okay, excellent. So this connection before content is really important because, again, one thing that unites us, we have family here. We have children that attend Wissahickon School District, and we want to know what's going on. And so this opportunity to really dive into understanding social and emotional learning is important. So as we continue with the presentation, I want to make sure I go to our next slide on what is social emotional learning exactly. So take a moment to think about that question, and I'm going to enlarge this for you to see. But what is social and emotional learning? There are no wrong answers here, but just want to kind of get a sense of what it is. And then we can add that to our chat box. So what is social and emotional learning? Feel free to add it into the chat. And again, no wrong or right answers to social and emotional learning. As we focus on social and emotional learning, the one thing that I love about it is that it engages not an individual only or a classroom only, but a whole community. And so as we think about social and emotional learning and creating those caring and motivating experiences for our students and helping to forge equitable learning environments, those are the things that we're looking at. Even looking at this caption of the children together, what are we looking at here in terms of social emotional learning? How does this manifest as social and emotional learning? And so those ideas that you have here are really important for us to share. So I have someone has noted that when you consider the influences a student has from outside school, as you prepare to meet them where they are in the classroom, that is definitely a part of social and emotional learning. When we focus in on the children that we see before us, in terms of who they are, their identity, their hopes, their dreams, the strengths that they bring to the table, and we capitalize on those and we cultivate them, that's also part of our social and emotional learning process. So here's a CASEL definition that I want to share with you on screen. Again, something that's really interesting about it is it starts off with a process. And it's not only a process that young people experience, but also adults. And going through this experience and this process, what we are doing is actually acquiring and applying and building knowledge, skills, and attitudes that really help us to develop thriving identities. We can manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, and show empathy for others. It is important in a sense when we're talking about social and emotional learning that we understand that these become lifelong skills that help us to establish and maintain supportive relationships, make responsible and caring decisions. And so as we work as classroom practitioners and we're interacting and engaging students, we want to be mindful of how social and emotional learning helps us to reach the whole child. Like we want them to be socially well, we want them to be emotionally well so that they can be academically able to do well in school. And so looking at the gamut of social and emotional learning is so essential to help our students to thrive to success. And so as we focus more on it, we know that research has shown that with students who are social and emotionally well, that there's academic wellness that goes along with that. In terms of creating that educational equity and excellence, we have students who are nurtured, supported, they feel a sense of belonging, valued, appreciated, who they are is embraced. They're able to take risks, they're able to thrive. They're able to express themselves and have a voice. These students, again, are willing to continue to learn and to grow and to have a productive struggle in that growing and learning. And so we look at their engagement. They are still able to, with that social and emotional capacity, engage in rigorous academic work, right? They're able to tackle those challenging curriculum and instructional practices that come along. Those are things that happen when you build that social and emotional capacity. Another thing that thrives with that is their ability to disrupt and dismantle various forms of inequities that exist. It's also something that's very empowering from young people, and they're able to co-create many things with the adults in their lives. And so this is important as we kind of go into understanding social and emotional learning a little bit more. So let me look into the chat and see what we have here. CEL takes away from time that is to be focused on core subjects and other academics at a time when our students are already behind. Teachers are not trained or able to be counselors. So that point is one that's really important for us to look at and focus on too. And when we look at social emotional learning, we don't want to look at it as something in addition to what we're doing in the classroom in instructional practice. It is how we do instructional practice. It's not a program that's added to the course. It is not something that is other. It's just really changing our mindset and our practice to know that when we're teaching students in front of us, we're teaching individuals, we're teaching human beings, and they're building and bringing with them interests, capabilities, strengths, and so forth. And those experiences, their prior knowledge is something that we can tap into to help them to connect to the curriculum, help them to make meaning of what we're teaching them in the classroom, to help them understand that there's not a disconnection between what they're learning and who they are, but helping them to really explore that self-awareness, right? And helping them to look at that social awareness. So as we go on through the presentation, there will be application that I will show you in terms of the classroom a little bit more. So I like that statement. And I know there'll be questions, and I'm going to kind of go back and forth with a couple of things through the presentation and come back and check on that. But in terms of that, it is not something isolated, it's something that we embed into the curriculum. As we look at teaching behaviors, that is something that's very explicit and can be taught very early on and should be. We teach students how to, or our children, how to ride a bicycle, how to tie their sneaker, and so forth. And so we teach them how to engage, how to share, how to assist one another on a project, how to collaborate, how to wrestle through this problem. So those are things that we're looking at in terms of social emotional learning. As we continue here, we're looking at social emotional learning in practice. Teacher learns about students' cultures, backgrounds, talents, and interests. So is that extra lesson planning time for me or something that I'm diving into and researching? Those are conversations that I'm having with my students in the classroom. As my students come in, there could be something the very beginning of the school year or school term where I'm doing team building or interest inventory. And I'm really diving into who those students are so I can connect that to what I'm doing in terms of the curriculum. In our conversations with students as we build upon the lessons and the things that we see them doing so well and wonderfully, they are often very free and sharing more of their identities and their experiences with us. So we make those naturally a part of the classroom, like we normalize those conversations. And so we're able to then make those meaningful connections to classroom materials, the curriculum, and the instruction. Student work being posted around the classroom, that helps to build their identities. Like they're seeing that what they worked on meant something, right? That you value that. And there's an audience for my work. Like it's hanging up, people can see that. And so those things, that visibility is also a part of social emotional learning, right? When we're deliberate in ensuring that every student that's present of all subgroups are actively engaged in classroom activities that we see here, that's meaningful social emotional learning taking place. So the teacher-student relationship is important. I wanted to get to the slide based off of the one comment that I focused on. When we have teacher and student relationships, and we're talking about building social emotional learning, knowing a child's name and the correct pronunciation of that name or the nickname that they prefer and so forth, that's a healthy way to build and to affirm that child's identity, that student's identity. Students who have needs, we again are responsive to those needs. We're able to use those things that we have in place in terms of interventions and supports to help them there, but also capitalize on the strengths that they have. So also looking at it through that asset-based or strengths-based approach. We can affirm the students' efforts. We can make sure that we're using positive teacher language, provide opportunities for students to share ideas and perspectives. All of those things are a part of social and emotional learning because we're letting them understand that the ideas that they bring in can be explored. Not necessarily that the ideas are always going to be the best idea or highly accepted or everyone's going to love it, but that idea is worth our having a conversation about or is worth discussing or exploring further. So those are things that we're seeing here when we're talking about teacher-student relationships. Connections are really important that we bring, whether it's talking over a science project or talking over a book, something that we're doing in the classroom, those connections form very, very naturally. the castle wheel and cell competencies. So if we look here, we're focusing on some more aspects of the social and emotional learning competencies that are broken down by self-awareness, social awareness, and so forth. And I'm going to make this a little larger because I also wanted to keep an eye on this piece, but I want to break here for a moment so that you have access to it. When we're focusing in on self-awareness and the question of, you know, how do we manage this in a classroom? That makes sense, you know, because you are focusing on your content. Teachers who are in the classroom come in as experts in that content, experts in their craft. And that's essential. And that in itself is a powerful model for students to see that a person who's standing before me, this adult, is engaging me in this lesson, in this content, or is passionate about this, or went to college and so forth, accomplished goals. That in itself is also part of a modeling of social and emotional learning. But when we're in the class and we have students who are in front of us, helping them to recognize their strengths, it's a part of social and emotional learning. And that's something we do as practitioners in the classroom. Helping them to be able to self-advocate, right? Have that self-efficacy is essential. For social awareness, like if we're reading literature and we're talking about something, we can leverage the literature to help them to engage and to have perspective taking, to understand what a character is going through in terms of empathy or appreciating diversity, a respect for others. Those are things that can be naturally a part of the curriculum. When we're doing problem solving in math, that's social and emotional learning. How do we struggle with this problem? How do we figure this out? How do we determine what value is this? That again is a part of social and emotional learning. In terms of looking at responsible decision-making here, you know, that ability to make constructive choices, we have students identifying problems, but not only doing that, but solving those problems. They need to analyze situations and evaluate. So if they're doing something, they have to evaluate which one is better. You know, how do you know that this source that you're using is a reliable source? You know, how can you determine that? And looking at reflecting, you wrote this, let's reflect on this, or let's reflect on your writing, right? That piece is so essential. Those responsibilities, especially an ethical responsibility, are things that we can build upon in terms of our content area. Self-management, again, for the student, goal setting is important, you know, helping them with the organizational skills, and then relationship skills. If they're collaborating, doing project-based learning, any type of cooperative learning in itself, that teamwork piece, they have to also be able to communicate with one another, whether it's verbal or written. And so the opportunity to socially engage and to build those relationships are really essential for students here. And so these competencies that you see help to really provide specifics on things that we can do concretely in the classroom to make it make sense for students, but to also build up that social and emotional aspects of students. There are other things in our building in terms of the clubs and activities that students are a part of that help to give them that whole child feel too. But within our classroom, this natural community that we have of learners can also be nurtured in the terms of social and emotional learning. Benefits of SEL are highlighted here. Improved self-concept and perception of others. We can see here increased connection to the school community, positive social behavior, stronger academic performance. Again, we see this with students who need to feel safe and valued and a sense of belonging. So again, all of these things in reducing behavioral problems, reducing stress, and development of effective skills are key and core. At Wissahickon School District, one thing that we focus on, again, that's really important, is our measurable goal statement, and that is that we want our students to experience a culture of belonging and dignity. So even creating that culture when students come into your classroom, you know, as you greet them at the door or as you say hi, or in your community of your classroom, that they know they belong and that they're respected and they're treated with that level of dignity. That helps continue to build that social and emotional learning. And so as we continue as a district to create equitable learning environments and outcomes, we do focus on students' social, emotional, mental, behavioral, and academic wellness. It's very important for them to succeed and be successful. And we know that in order for them to succeed academically, that social and emotional component piece is so vital, so essential. So I want to stay here for a bit because this is something that goes back to that statement made about like, what does this look like in the classroom? Like, how can we do that? We're responsible for the content. Like, how can we teach social and emotional learning? And we're not counselors, and nor is anyone expecting anyone to be a counselor. So that's an excellent point there. What's really important is that we do have counseling. We have several supports in place for students who need those additional supports in place, and those more tiered or intensive types of supports, they're available as well. But in terms of the classroom, what's essential too is that it is a community. It's a learning community of human beings that are present, and their identities and how they show up are valid and vital to their learning experiences. And so we ourselves know that when we're in communities and people know us or we feel that we belong, we're more able to take risk and grow. So some things in the classroom that you're probably already doing are the following here. Like when you are doing, if you're an elementary school teacher and you have expectations and routines, that helps to create a sense of community and safety. And so that's valuable. Practices of morning meetings when you're checking in with students, it's a part of social and emotional learning. Like you're helping us to socialize and to establish a norm and community, safety. If you're exploring identity, helping students to raise their self-awareness, that too is a part of that social and emotional learning component piece. Team building, self-assessments, when we're writing and we have opportunities to revise that work, to help with peer conversations or peer edits, that too is a part of social and emotional learning because we're communicating, we're also perspective taking in that moment, we're thinking through things, we're trying to maintain a goal. So that reflection, that feedback in itself is crucial. You know, when we are professionals in any field that we take on, feedback helps us to grow and to reflect and to see where we are. Like if you're doing some project and you're like, whoa, this is great, and someone offers feedback, sometimes you're like, you know what, I didn't consider it that way. So that feedback is essential at any age. And so that is also a part of a social emotional learning piece. Critical thinking skills. We want our students to be critical thinkers. We want them to be productive and independent thinkers. And one way to do that is to make sure we have that healthy community for them to thrive in. Discussions, if you're doing that, that's important. It's been normalized in your classroom and that's needed. That perspective taking, again, modeling of competencies, and the list goes on, as you can see. These are ways to build student agency. And again, I always say like leveraging literature and opportunities is critical. At the secondary level, you'll see a lot of similar things here too. Getting into examining biases, right? That's an important part of that self-awareness. Debating, I love debates. Students love debates. Those types of things are so essential. I was just at the high school this week and they did a poetry slam, and it was wonderful to hear students' perspectives and to hear how they want to change things in society. So those things are a part of that social emotional learning because they're feeling valid and valued and heard and appreciated, and that they belong in that community. So these things that we see here in terms of building resilience, in terms of metacognition, problem solving, and again, I have to say, embracing productive struggles. Those are very essential in terms of cell in action. So if you're in the classroom and you're teaching, I'll say English, for instance, and you're reading a piece of literature, students being able to have that perspective taking, or if they're writing and they're reflecting on their writing and so forth, or you're giving them assignments and there are 3 topics here and you can choose 1 out of the 3, that voice and choice piece is also very affirming and empowering for them. So those are some aspects. So what I'm going to do right now is actually, before I get into the voice and choice piece, I'm going to stop here and stop my share because I want to see you for a moment here. I want to dive into some of the comments to kind of just address what we have here. And see what we can look at. So I'm going to take this first year of CEL. Middle school didn't have it before. So this is the first year for CEL, so middle school didn't have it before this year. Providing feedback right now, CEL is something that is a terrible idea. We wanted to stop. So again, one thing that's really important as we go through, and see is that there are different types of opinions here, examining biases, question. These things are really important as we look at students in conversations, right? So sometimes, we may have, and we all have biases. That's a part of who we are as human beings. And those internal biases can be harmless and we don't even know it. We have a friend that's running for president, so we want to vote for her, and so forth, without listening to the other candidates. Or unknowingly, we may have a bias and not be aware of that, that's something that would be constituted as ageism. So our students, when we're looking at products and processes and so forth and propaganda, it allows them to really wrestle with that. And that's been a part of curriculum and best practices always, for them to really dive into what it is that they can look at very carefully. What is it that they can examine as they go through different things in terms of it. So with our students, what's been really interesting for them is the opportunity to really engage in those conversations. And so at the end of this piece, we'll be able to come back and look at some of that. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of go into the final portion before we get into our questions, which I'm looking forward to. So with voice and choice as a model, there are two questions here just to think about in terms of the wonderful things that you already do at home, right? So there's a lot of things that we do with our students and we do with our children. And that is just the first thing is at home, those conversations that we have, that's important. And that's what we do in the classroom. We did recently a belonging climate survey just to see how our students were feeling in terms of their sense of belonging and appreciation or being appreciated in school. And it was good to hear that many, or the feedback in terms of that, where many of them saw themselves. And so here, the work that you're doing at home to help build their leadership skills, their love for reading, their love for math, whatever it is, those are the things that we want to continue to nurture, because we want them to know that they belong in our district, that their work matters, that who they are also matters. And so right now for voice and choice, there are two questions that I want you to look at. One is to start, what are some things that you do already at home to support your child in terms of social and emotional learning? Whether they're conversations that you're having, you're watching something together, they see you organizing things at home or coming up with a big project that you have to finish at work, and they see how methodical and organized you are in tackling that project. That's an excellent example for them too. So what are some things that you do at home, conversations that you have, perspective taking, those active listening skills and things of that nature that you highlight with your children? Or if you don't want to answer that question, what are some new things that you can do at home to develop it even more in terms of social emotional learning? And so once again, as we kind of dive into this, I want to be clear that the first half of this presentation is just that, it's a presentation of social emotional learning, just so that we understand that when we're talking about social emotional learning, we are just talking about lifelong skills. Like our children are going to explore the world. They're already doing that at the schools that they're in, having wonderful conversations with others, using their voice and so forth, navigating problems, right? Solving those problems. And so that's a part of social emotional learning. And those social and emotional skills are lifelong skills that we have as an adult, right? So when we have a question, we're able to pose a question, we're able to engage respectfully, we're able to disagree and move forward to an outcome that's something that's going to be of value. So those are things that we want to keep in mind too, as examples, if we think of them. So what I'm going to do is to make sure that I present a breakout opportunity. So I'm going to pose these questions into the chat box. So let me gather them first. And I'm going to place them here so that you can see them as well. So you should have these questions popping up. So I'm going to place them here in the chat box. And as we look at social and emotional learning and SEL, the purpose of this opportunity is that we acknowledge the partnership that we have with you as families and how vital it is in the work that we're doing with students. We also want to be very transparent and visible in our communication that although we want our students to excel and do their best, and we are very much invested in them academically, we also know that they're your children, right? And we want them to have wonderful social experiences when they're at school. And we want to help them with that emotional aspect. And we want to build on their self-esteem and build and cultivate the strengths that they bring to the classroom. And so our awareness of where our students are and how we can help them to develop as active learners, that's something that's at the heart of a lot of the work that we're doing. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the number that we have here, and I'm going to break us into groups, breakout rooms. And when we're in the breakout rooms, it will provide us with an opportunity to engage. So I too will engage in conversation with you. So if there were questions or statements that you made that you want to pose during that time as well, before we get into the questions, will be something that I can do with you as well. What I like to also offer before we dive in is an opportunity to review with you that as we started, we began with just that whole culture of norming. So as you break out into your sessions today with one of these two questions, again, choosing one, as a reminder for the norms, just stay engaged, experience discomfort, which some of you are, and speak your truth, and then expect and accept non-closure. I'm going to do my very best to address your questions because that's why you're here, and also to understand, like leaning in, because that's really important. But again, the norms are here and established to help us to maintain a healthy and respectful environment so that you, when you're in your group, your triad, that you all can engage in conversation and get something out of this. So we're going to break out, and please look at the two questions again and decide on the one that you want to tackle, because that's going to be important. Okay, so we're going to have, looks like 3 rooms. Each room will consist of 3 individuals. One will have 4, and I will join each room. So again, the task is in the chat box. There are 2 questions that are posed, but again, this is a voice and choice modeling activity in our classrooms with our students. We provide them opportunities. Sometimes there is not an opportunity. This is what you're going to work on, but where we have the opportunity to provide them with voice and choice, it's essential and it is a nice piece. So here there are 2 questions. You're choosing one. The first, again, are what are some things that you're already doing at home with social emotional learning? And for some of you, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. This is who I am and what I do with my kids. And the second is, are there anything, is there anything new, or are there any ideas that came across that you're like, yes, I want to try this, or I want to add this, because those types of things will be essential as well. All right, I'm going to open all rooms and dive in shortly. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. It was very, very interesting to have the opportunity to go into our breakout rooms today to really just engage in social and emotional learning. So I'm going to reshare my screen with you very quickly.
Ms. Latour, the rooms have not all closed yet. There's one room that is still in that room.
Okay.
So when you close the rooms, you have to wait 60 seconds.
Oh my gosh,
for everyone
the
to come
60
back.
seconds rule. Thank you for that.
So it looks like about 15 seconds remaining, and room
okay,
2 will be back.
perfect. So I'll wait till that last room comes out. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So as we were here for this group, it was really interesting hearing from you and being in conversation. I appreciated your thoughts and perspectives, and what was very beneficial too was that as we were engaging in our conversations in small group, we were actually engaging in such a way for many of us in certain spaces where our students are engaging in conversation. When we establish those norms, and we talked about those norms at the very beginning, we do so because we want to create an opportunity for us to have a brave space where we can engage in conversation, and we can look at our thinking, and we can also reflect on our thinking and so forth, and also consider other perspectives. So this breakout session that we had tonight was an opportunity for us to really engage in that social and emotional learning, which it is. We're being social, we're engaged, and there's emotion in what we're saying. There's thought in what we're saying, there's passion behind it, and there's positioning. And there is no, attempt here of a persuasion of a position or an opinion, but more so of an engagement. And I think that's really important as we think about where we are. So just to reiterate a couple of points about the benefits of SEL, when we see it in action, definitely we're forming those positive social behaviors that we want for our students. There's strong academic performance in place that improves self-concept and also improved perception of others. There's a reduction in behavioral problems. I think someone asked about that. Do we see anything in terms of behavioral problems being reduced? And to answer that question is absolutely. And emotional conflict, there's a reduction there and reduction of stress and the development of effective skills. Those are benefits that have been researched and that have been found that we see in correlating with social and emotional learning. So I'm going to share my screen once again. I appreciated the opportunity to engage with you in the small group session. And here, I want to go to our questions that we have, just to come back from that opportunity. We had this piece called a breakout session where we use a voice and choice, which was modeling something that would be done in a classroom where we might have a lesson and we want students to engage with their peers. And so providing them with that social opportunity to engage with their peers, but also before that, providing them with maybe an option as to what they're going to respond to is something else, giving them voice and choice. So I like to start with number one. What are some things that you do already at home related to social and emotional learning? And then after we close with this particular activity, we're going to look at some of the resources that are here, and then we'll have an opportunity to do a whole group conversation in terms of questions. So anyone, if you want to, you can drop it into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself if there's something that you'd like to share with number one. So what are some things that you currently do at home already? Any takers? And again, you can place it in the chat box if you prefer.
Why is this relevant when we're here to discuss what is happening in the schools?
The relevancy of this is that this particular session was focused on social and emotional learning. So I wanted to also provide an experience of what that looks like in practice. So this session specifically focuses on that social emotional aspect, and then the modeling piece, like providing that question of voice and choice. So did that answer your question?
Well, we're not practicing at home, we're parenting.
Right. So what are you doing at home?
Again, I think this is not a productive use of our time when we're trying to find out. A lot of us have asked specific questions of you, and we keep getting very vague statements. And the only research you can point to is the Castle website, which has no long-term research. So how do we know this isn't going to negatively impact our children in the long term, in their success, in their professional careers, in how they interact with other people?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent question that you asked. So when we're asking students to be self-aware or socially aware, and we're asking them to have that propensity to engage in conversation and to develop a level of empathy and understanding and perspective taking. Those are skills that are lifelong skills as adults that will help them to navigate any social setting, but any workplace setting and so forth. Those are the things that we were harnessing in terms of the discussion of social emotional learning. As teachers in the classroom, what we focused on, of course, is our craft, and the content that's being delivered with our students, with also knowing that we have human beings in front of us, our students, and looking at who they are as they come into the classroom and capitalizing on the strengths that you have enriched at home. And that's what we want to do. And to your point about the questions were designed just to, again, provide an example of engagement and also voice and choice, because there's that knowledge and understanding already that you're doing this at home, right? And so we wanted to just capitalize on that in terms of the conversation. Where you would like to go in terms of just engaging a little bit more in direct questioning, as I said at the very start of the presentation, after the presentation, we would dive into those questions. I just wanted to kind of explain a little bit about social emotional learning, also highlight what we were doing in the classroom. So when we looked at what that looked like in terms of sell in the classroom, right, at the elementary level, what are some things that I'm seeing here? So some ideas to reflect and do morning meetings and leverage literature and participate in team building. At the secondary level, as we keep moving, that metacognition, student-led meetings or conferences and so forth, those are things that I'm seeing in action. And so it was really just to be transparent about what that looked like in action, and that it wasn't a program that was separate at this time. It wasn't something that was in addition to the content. It's just how we engage with human beings in the classroom, how we engage with our students, and letting you know that their needs, their social and emotional wellness is important to us. Like, we want them to be academically successful, but we also know that we want them to feel safe in our classroom to do that, and to do that successfully. So with that point, what I'm going to do, because I think it's a good question that you posed, I'm going to go back here then to the extensions of learning at home. These are things that you're probably already doing at home, right? In terms of modeling those pro-social behaviors, being a good listener and so forth. And these are things that really help to reinforce a lot of the great things that we're doing in the classroom when we're asking students to encourage those opportunities for your child to think creatively and critically. That's what we're doing in the classroom. So as an extension, if you're doing that at home, it just reinforces the good practices that we're doing as teachers in the classroom and you're doing as you're gearing and raising your child. Again, working through problems together, teaching problem solving strategies. These are all wonderful extensions that you do at home already, and that reinforces the good stuff that we're doing in the classroom. So in terms of resources, I did provide some resources here. During my first session, I mentioned to the team, the participants that were present, that I would add a resource slide because that was something that was an inquiry. So I did respond with this. The video recording of tonight's presentation will be available on site along with the presentation for access. In terms of moving forward, we have an upcoming community conversation workshop that will be on April 20th for a sense of belonging. And there are others too, the importance of language and mindset. With the importance of language and mindset, that's a good one because it really goes into more a conversation of language that we kind of started to dive into today. So if you want to get into more of the explicit language that's being used and so forth and the mindset behind it, that's a great session to attend. And then restorative practices will be our culminating session. So at this point, I have gone through the social and emotional learning presentation this evening. For anyone who came in late, again, when we're looking at social and emotional learning, we're looking at the aspects of seeing that it is a process in which all young people are able to acquire and apply knowledge and skills that will help them to achieve personal and collective goals.